Artillery Commander Moore stood before the command console of the orbital stealth reconnaissance cruiser, his eyes locked dead on the holographic display. Invisible drop pods were plummeting toward the plains of Delaware Earth at Mach 3. The Empire's kinetic bombardment array boasted enough firepower to cripple any carbon-based civilization's anti-air grid in under 5 seconds. But just as the lead pod was about to breach the coordinates of a primitive agricultural settlement, a heavy pneumatic cannon hacked together from a rusted tractor chassis and massive industrial propane tanks unleashed a deafening roar. A 10-pound orange botanical fruit, known to the Earthlings as a pumpkin, was violently discharged by this crude terrestrial contraption with supersonic kinetic energy. The primitive biological payload struck the drop pod's composite armor dead center. It detonated mid-air, bursting into a viscous cloud of orange pulp and shattered alien alloy. Moore's pride and joy, an interstellar orbital strike, was flawlessly shattered by a bunch of cheap beer-chugging farmers and their oversized homemade toy. Worse still, his audio receivers picked up a megaphone-amplified shout from the surface. "I told y'all cranking her up to 306 would break the world record. Bring up the backup pumpkins." Moore's ashen skin pulled taut. His tactical nexus completely failed to comprehend this barbaric kinetic interception. Moore slammed his clenched fist onto the tempered control console. The high-impact panel instantly fractured into a web of white cracks. An alloy nutrient slurry cup resting on the edge launched into the air, ricocheted off the ceiling, and plastered the wall in dark brown sludge. Roaring, he kicked away a blaring proximity alert siren at his feet. Jagged glass shards screeched across the face of his power armor boots. "Cancel all subsequent orbital bombardment sequences." Moore's bellow rattled the ship's communication lines. Every Imperial officer on deck instinctively shrank their necks, terrified to look up. "Deploy a tactical lander. The adjutant will lead a squad of our 5 most elite assault troopers. Infiltrate the rear of that agricultural sector immediately. I want that primitive kinetic weapon reduced to scrap metal, and every carbon-based life form present executed on site." His fingers flew across the authorization panel. Top-tier combat directives instantly unlocked the docking bay's launch override. A 17-ton tactical lander glided silently out of the launch port along its magnetic rails, its stealth coating rippling almost invisibly against the starlight. Moore leaned in, his face twisted in rage, hovering inches from the hollow screen. He watched the lander's altitude readout plunge from 100,000 feet, tearing through dense tropospheric cloud cover. Down below, the warm glow of thousands of pickup truck headlights dotted the screen's edge, shining brighter and brighter like a swarm of fireflies. Down in the lander's hold, the adjutant clicked the safety off his plasma rifle. 5 assault troopers, clad head to toe in standard-issue Imperial stealth armor, fell into a tactical column behind him. The cold thrust of anti-gravity propellants spun the air at the loading ramp into tight vortexes as the tactical lander touched down, completely silent, into a soft, diesel-choked Delaware farm field. The adjutant's heavy boot treads bit deep into the wet black mud and rotting pumpkin vines. The Empire's standard-issue optical camouflage rippled across their armor in pale blue waves, rendering them effectively invisible to all standard optical sensors. He was just about to initiate a full-spectrum situational sweep with his tactical visor when a literal heat wave of acrid diesel exhaust and sizzling bacon grease slapped him square in the faceplate. Piercing red alarms instantly blew up the comms channel. The stealth coding integrity readout in the top right of his HUD took a nosedive. The optical camo on the troopers beside him glitched into a flurry of static before being coated in a thick, dull layer of grease. The adjutant jerked his head up. As far as his eyes could see, hundreds of pickup trucks had just stomped on the gas simultaneously, their exhaust pipes belching out jet-black diesel smoke. To make matters worse, the greasy smoke from hundreds of trackside BBQ grills was funneling straight toward the squad on the wind. In less than 3 seconds, the entire assault team's stealth coating was caked in grime. 6 bizarrely glowing, pixelated humanoid shapes now stood stiffly in the middle of the clearing, sticking out like sore thumbs under the bright yellow sun. Big bearded Jim, knuckles wrapped around an ice-cold, sweating can of beer, had just chugged half of it down. His Adam's apple bobbed. He glanced up and spotted 6 glowing, pixelated figures standing in the dirt clearing, right next to a weird, lopsided metal pod sunk into the mud. He tucked the beer under his armpit. His work boots crunched over the rotting vines as he closed the distance in a few massive strides. He even mistook the strange smell of ozone radiating off them for some new experimental fuel vapor, cooked up by a bunch of college nerds. Just last year, those Mitt boys tried to pull a fast one with an optical camo pumpkin trebuchet, only for Earl to slap 'em with 3 citations for cheating. Jim remembered that stunt plain as day. Jim swung a massive, oil-stained paw and slapped it hard onto the adjutant's power armor pauldron. The smack was so heavy it knocked a half-smoked cigarette right out of the adjutant's hand into the mud. "Hey boys, that is one hell of a custom rig y'all got there." Jim barked, his bushy beard bristling with a massive grin, as he tapped the adjutant's cold, glowing outer shell. "This metal chassis is 10 times tougher than that flimsy acrylic crap those Mitt eggheads brought last year. Simon, spill it. How much grant money did y'all burn for this cloaking effect?" The sensors inside the adjutant's pauldron sparked wildly from the impact. His tactical visor was instantly swamped with cascading red error codes. 3 solid pages of stealth coding compromised and power armor. Calibration offset spammed his HUD. His knuckles popped as his reflexes took over, ripping the plasma rifle from its holster. Cold blue plasma energy surged down the barrel. The weapon's high-pitched whine made the eardrums of the troopers next to him throb as the muzzle leveled dead at Jim's chest. Jim squinted sideways at the ridiculously skinny, glowing barrel and let out a snort. The ice-cold beer tucked under his arm sloshed, spilling foam down the leg of his pumpkin seed-covered cargo pants. He pointed a thumb back at the massive, pitch-black WE anti-aircraft barrel towering among a cluster of propane tanks. His booming voice drowned out the roar of the distant pickup engines. "You actually pulling out that little squirt gun to show off? Hell, I bet that thing couldn't punch through a rotten pumpkin at 50 yards. You want real high-tech engineering? Come check out the pneumatic destroyer Mark III. Now that is a real man's romance." The adjutant's brain completely blue-screened. The encrypted channel was entirely filled with the hysterical, static-laced screaming of Orbital Commander Moore. Behind the adjutant, his 5 elite Imperial assault troopers stood frozen in place, rifles raised, completely forgetting to flip the safeties off. Their boots were sunk half an inch into the muddy pumpkin patch, totally immobilized. Jim's massive pumpkin seed-crusted hand swatted the adjutant's wrist like he was chopping firewood. The humming plasma rifle violently jerked skyward. A cold blue beam of energy grazed the turf and scorched half a row of chain-link fence draped in pumpkin vines. With his other hand, Jim grabbed the quick-release straps exposed at the back of the adjutant's armored neck. His rough knuckles literally crushed the alloy buckle out of shape. Extending his massive arm, Jim hooked the webbing of 2 of the frozen troopers beside him. He started dragging all 3 of them toward the anti-aircraft gun like he was hauling 3 sacks of fresh silage. The alien soldiers, their boots still stuck in the mud and their power armor's auxiliary thrusters screaming error codes, couldn't muster an ounce of resistance. Spilled beer ran down Jim's wrist. The foam smeared across one of the troopers' visors, instantly turning the already diesel-caked faceplate into opaque frosted glass. With a heavy thud, Jim slammed the three of them down against the concrete counterweight next to the pneumatic destroyer Mark EI. He rapped his knuckles against the rusted, blackened wheel barrel. Decades-old rust flaked off the sides. See this? This here barrel is vintage 1944 anti-air hardware. 8 inches thick. Your fancy pants, OSHA safety codes, ain't nothing but toilet paper to this beauty. Jim pointed at 3 massive propane tanks welded together in a row. The red needles on the pressure gauges were already a half tick past the danger line. He jammed his thumb onto the rusty hydraulic lock valve wrench. Last time I cranked the pressure to 3,200 psi, a 10-pounder flew out of here at Mach 1.3. Damn thing even pinged the radar of a passing Air Force trainer. Just to show off, Jim wrenched the brass valve a half-turn. High-pressure propane let out an ear-piercing shriek, blasting the adjutant's error-filled visor with a face full of oily gas. Through his red code-riddled tactical visor, the adjutant caught movement in his peripheral vision. The 3 remaining assault troopers back by the lander had just reached for their thermal melta-cutters and were crouching toward a massive black smoke-belching diesel generator. They caught flying half-empty beer bottles to the back of the head, stumbling forward in unison. 7 or 8 farm mechanics' pant legs rolled up to the knees and boots caked in 3 inches of muck, swarmed the 3 aliens. Their eyes locked onto the glowing pale blue arcs of the thermal melta-cutters. The mechanics erupted into a cheer so loud it shook the dry hay on the ground. Holy shit, this plasma melta mod is freaking wicked. Old Joe, a mechanic with a bushy gray beard, slapped the outermost trooper on the pauldron so hard the alien spun a half circle in place. You're telling me we don't even gotta preheat the rusted-out bolts on a truck chassis to cut 'em? Damn, Mitt really blew the budget this year. Before the terrified troopers could even process an explanation, heavy grease-covered 10-pound torque wrenches were shoved into their tactical gloved hands. The mechanics, sporting fingers as thick as carrots, practically dragged the aliens 30 yards over to a white F-150 with a blown rear tire. Their hollering overpowered the screaming propane tank. Don't just stand there. We got 3 grown men unable to budge these lug nuts, and you boys got them heavy-duty robot arms. Get over here and lend a hand. Well, hook y'all up with some ice-cold brews when we're done. The adjutant's encrypted tactical channel was instantly flooded with the screams of his subordinates, mixed with the crude, boisterous laughter of humanity. One trooper tried to back away, only to have a long nozzle oil can shoved into his lower back, while somebody else jammed half a bag of warm fried pumpkin sticks into his armor's side storage compartment. The other 2 troopers, still terrified to step out of the muddy pumpkin patch, got yanked by the arms by a couple of menthol-smoking middle-aged women. They were handed steel wool and ordered to scrub the charred grease off a nearby BBQ grill. Up on the orbital stealth cruiser, the bridge warning lights were flashing like a rural disco strobe. Moore stared at the live feed of his ground squad on the holographic projector, his jaw clenching so hard it popped. It took him a full 30 seconds to drag his tactical processing logic back from a total blue screen void. He was watching 6 elite ace operatives, soldiers he had spent 20 years handpicking from the Empire's finest boot camps, getting handed steel wool and wrenches by a bunch of cigarette-smoking humans. They didn't even have a split second to raise their weapons. He slammed a fist into the alloy control panel, leaving a shallow dent. The rage he had been bottling up instantly vaporized every military protocol in the book. His fingers hammered the encrypted comms panel. He fat-fingered the highest-tier clearance unlock code 3 times before it finally verified. His exclusive emergency link to the adjutant finally tore through the thick layer of diesel particulate interference on the ground, his voice breaking into a hysterical, static-filled roar. Adjutant. Execute ultimate purge directive. Detonate your waist-mounted antimatter grenade immediately. Vaporize that entire firing range and all those lower-tier life forms down to their base particles. Moore kicked a thick stack of Galactic Empire ground, infiltration combat protocols straight into the bridge's garbage incinerator. At the same time, he unlocked all of the ship's reserve energy, cranking the orbital bombardment arrays, preheating power to absolute maximum. On the holo screen, the little red dot representing the adjutant violently jerked to a halt. Clear as day, Moore watched his alien subordinate, fully clad in power armor, tremblingly reach a sensor-loaded glove toward the safety latch of the antimatter grenade mounted on his hip. The knuckles of the adjutant's sensor-loaded glove flared with a signature alien ice blue hue from sheer exertion. He popped the safety pin off the antimatter grenade. The high-energy core instantly erupted with a blinding crimson halo. A piercing, high-frequency hum drilled straight through his power armor chassis and into his bone. 3 fresh lines of red warnings scrolled across his already glitch-spammed visor. The warped alloy buckle on the back of his neck rattled violently. Trembling, he yanked the entire grenade free from its mount. The countdown timer in his HUD was dropping like a stone. A radiation wave swept over a half-rotted pumpkin at his feet, instantly scorching the green rind into a blackened, shriveled husk. Gritting his teeth, he swung his arm back as far as it would go. Loose sensors on his pauldron hissed and spat electrical sparks. With one final thrust of his muscles, he was going to hurl this ultimate weapon, capable of leveling half the plains, straight into the cheering crowd of beer-guzzling humans. Suddenly, the rough crunch of heavy-duty work boots on dry straw stopped dead, a mere 18 inches to his side. The adjutant's power armor froze mid-motion. He stiffly wrenched his overheating helmet sideways. His eyes met the furious glare of Aunt Betty, her face dusted in baking flour. Her massive hands, clad in thick, heat-resistant welding gloves, clamped down hard onto the blistering metal shell of the antimatter grenade. The searing heat, intense enough to breach power armor thermal plating, sizzled against the half-dry cow manure on the surface of her glove, sending up wisps of smoke. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she scowled and shot the adjutant a lethal glare. Her voice boomed louder than the hissing relief valve of the nearby pneumatic cannon. "You little punk-ass mitt brats. Sneaking in high-yield chemical propellants without registering 'em, huh? The tournament explicitly bans unapproved volatile fuels. I've been chasing this damn thing halfway across the camp." With a flick of her wrist, she effortlessly yanked the fully activated, red-flashing antimatter grenade straight out of the adjutant's completely seized grip. The warped alloy safety pin clattered into the diesel-soaked mud. She held the spherical object, humming so violently it made her palms numb, up to her face. Seeing the core pulsating red 3 times a second, she chuckled and clapped her gloves together. "Well, it'll be. This thing's got more kick than Jim's 3 propane tanks combined. Shove this in a pumpkin and it'll break last year's 3-mile record for damn sure." She tucked the blistering hot grenade under her arm. The corner of her flour-dusted apron brushed against the glowing red shell. Spinning on her heels, she marched briskly toward the muzzle of the pneumatic destroyer Mark IEI. Her rubber rain boots splattered mud high into the air. The bottle opener wrench clipped to her waist, jangling with every step. Behind her, the adjutant, frozen like a statue, suddenly erupted into an ear-piercing system overload screech. Loose sensors on his pauldron blew out in a shower of sparks. A short distance away, the 3 alien troopers currently being forced to swap out a pickup's drive shaft simultaneously dropped their wrenches with a loud clang. The other 2 troopers, who had just been hauled off by Jim to inspect the anti-air rifling, whipped around in sheer panic. All 6 elite assault troopers synchronized a full-power thruster burn. The pale blue exhaust instantly fried the dry hay beneath their feet into curled black ash. The adjutant kicked off the ground first, launching himself forward and slinging mud 3 feet into the air. Only one directive remained in his mind: recover the antimatter grenade and detonate it immediately. But barely 3 steps into his sprint, he slammed headfirst into a massive barrel-chested dude with BBQ sauce in his chest hair, carrying half a roasted pig. The guy didn't even stumble. His rock-hard shoulder caught the adjutant's chest plate with a muffled thud. The adjutant flew backward through the air, landing flat on his back in a diesel-soaked mud puddle. Black muck smeared straight across the red error codes on his tactical visor. The 2 troopers leading the charge behind him couldn't brake in time and plowed straight into 3 burly farmers who were mid-cheers with their rib. Annoyed that these metal clunkers were interrupting their toast, the farmers casually swatted them aside. Both suits of power armor crashed backward into a tin tub full of ice-cold beer. Ice chunks flooded in through the gaps in their visors. The blue flames of their thrusters were instantly snuffed out, leaving only hissing white smoke. The remaining 3 troopers tried to weave through the crowd to intercept Betty. A few middle-aged women squatting by the roadside eating pumpkin pie glanced up, casually tossing the dregs of their iced beers straight onto the troopers' thruster nozzle. Running at maximum output, the thrusters let out a few agonizing chokes and locked up completely. The 3 aliens slipped on the stray mini-pumpkins rolling around the dirt, tumbling in a heap of limbs. Their plasma rifles went flying, landing squarely in a pile of glowing BBQ charcoal. The adjutant struggled out of the mud pit. Wiping the black sludge off his visor, he watched in horror as Aunt Betty, tracking cow manure with her rubber boots, confidently marched up onto the steel operating platform of the pneumatic destroyer Mark EII. The antimatter grenade in her welding glove flashed furiously. The high-frequency hum was now shaking every single dial in his power armor into a frenzied dance. A half-empty can of foaming beer rolled around big bearded Jim's feet. He watched Aunt Betty step up onto the platform in her manure-stained boots. Still clutching the violently flashing antimatter grenade in her thick welding gloves, she slammed it straight into a pre-hollowed dry ice cavity inside a massive white pumpkin. It fit like a glove. With a smooth shove, the 10-pound pumpkin, humming with high-frequency death, slid deep into the modified breech of the anti-aircraft gun. The heavy steel locking lugs snapped shut with a definitive bone-rattling clack. Jim flashed a wide grin, showing off his tobacco-stained teeth. He grabbed the oxidized brass pressure valve handle, his knuckles bulging with veins as he strained. The needles on the 3 massive propane tanks were already dancing in the yellow warning zone. Gritting his teeth, he cranked the valve past its absolute limit. The screech of grinding metal shrieked louder than the pickup engines a half-mile away. All 3 needles violently shattered past the red safety mark. The internal hyperpressure forced clear cooling oil to ooze out around the edges of the plastic gauge casing. He pressed his ear against the freezing exterior of the cannon barrel for half a second. Confirming there wasn't a whisper of a leak, he turned to Aunt Betty and flashed a big thumbs up. The entire steel frame of the pneumatic destroyer Marky Wern began to violently shudder under the critical overpressure. A tiny tin pumpkin flag welded to the side of the barrel vibrated into a blur, and the loose hay on the ground started dancing to the rhythm. Inside the adjutant's mud-caked tactical visor, the thermal sensor readouts completely shattered their upper limits. That fatal energy signature, a 100% match for the antimatter core, now radiating from the barrel, shot straight up the encrypted comms link. Not a millisecond later, it slammed directly into the main control panel of the orbital stealth cruiser at 30,000 feet. 30,000 feet above, the bridge of the orbital stealth cruiser erupted. Every single warning klaxon blew out in the exact same second. The crimson emergency strobes painted Moore's bruised knuckles the color of fresh blood. The data stream on the main console in front of him shattered all display threshold. Electrical sparks leaped from the dent he had smashed earlier, instantly burning a hole through a printed page of the Galactic Empire orbital firepower calibration protocols. Moore launched himself out of the commander's chair, kicking over a stack of alloy ammo crates. Metal rounds scattered across the bridge. He stared at the kinetic trajectory arrow on the holo screen, straight as a razor, and the hair on the back of his neck stood straight up. The energy fingerprint was a flawless 100% match for the antimatter core. Yet the targeting coordinates were dead locked onto the rusted breech of the pneumatic cannon on the surface. Projected altitude, 32,000 feet. The flight path's terminus, the port side engine bay of his own cruiser. Impossible. Moore's screech reduced his visor comms to screeching static. Completely abandoning his Imperial officer decorum, he hammered his fists against the console edge. Who the hell authorized them to load an antimatter core into a kinetic accelerator? The duty officer next to him frantically yanked the engine throttle, his knuckles turning pale from the strain. The cruiser's plasma engines instantly went into overdrive, their pale blue exhaust tearing the stratospheric clouds to shreds. Moore's neural tactical database frantically ran 3 separate sweeps of every known civilization's combat manual. Not a single contingency plan existed for intercepting a 10-pound pumpkin wrapped around an antimatter grenade. Screaming, he shoved the engine throttle straight past its physical limiter. All hands emergency evasive climb. Divert all shield power to the port hull. Now! Big bearded Jim ground his molars together, shaking the beer foam right out of his bristly stubble. He threw his entire center of gravity backward, his calloused hands locking in a death grip on the polished hydraulic firing lanyard, and with a roaring holler, he yanked the rope straight past the dead stop limit. The welds on all 3 massive propane tanks simultaneously let out a near-rupture screech. The entire HFY anti-air barrel of the pneumatic destroyer Mark II violently convulsed on its foundation. A ferocious blast wave erupted from the muzzle, launching half a ton of hay into the air and blowing the crowd of spectators 10 yards away collectively backward. Full cans of ice beer splashed out of their pop-tops, running down their wrists and into the dirt. In the next second, a deafening sonic boom tore through the chaotic noise. The white pumpkin, armed with the antimatter grenade, blasted out of the barrel at a terrifying velocity exceeding Mach 2. The supersonic shockwave wrapped the projectile in a translucent white halo. The human eye could only register a blinding pale blur before it angled sharply upward, piercing the low-hanging clouds and aggressively tearing toward the 30,000-foot mark. The crowd completely lost its mind. A roar of cheers practically flipped the topsoil. A dozen burly guys hurled their cowboy hats into the sky. The deafening country music blasting from the modified pickups actually skipped a beat from the sonic boom. Even the ribs on the BBQ grills rattled loose. Jim casually dropped the empty firing lanyard at his feet. His knuckles were bone white. He craned his neck, eyes locked on the rapidly shrinking flight trail, and tilted his head back, chugging down half a can of ice-cold beer to soothe his burning lungs. The bridge alarms were shrieking so hard the speakers blew out. On the half-scorched main console, a high-speed red dot, previously categorized by the system as atmospheric avian, suddenly popped up, screaming toward the ship's port side at Mach 2+. Moore's bruised fingers dug into the edge of the console, his back teeth grinding to dust. He had just shoved the throttle past the physical stop. The overloaded plasma engines were spitting out a violet thrust, yanking the entire ship desperately into higher altitude. The diverted port side shields weren't even at 30% capacity. In his tactical visor, he watched the pale, shockwave-wrapped object rapidly balloon in size. There were still a few specks of uncleared hay stuck to its surface. It was a projectile entirely absent from the Galactic Empire's registered kinetic weapons database. A split second later, the 10-pound hardened white pumpkin slammed dead center into the composite armor of the port-side stealth launch array. The alloy plating, designed to withstand high-energy lasers, caved in 3 feet deep like soggy cardboard. The antimatter grenade, buried in the pulp, triggered its safety switch on impact. A blinding blue-white orb of light detonated without warning. Half the bridge's tempered observation windows were instantly dyed a brilliant blue. The shockwave blew Moore 2 feet into the air. His back slammed violently into the metal spine of the commander's chair. His helmet's retention clips snapped off with a sharp crack. Dizzy and disoriented, he fumbled for the control console, his fingertips grazing a shower of electrical sparks. That was when he saw the port hull ripped wide open. The entire stealth launch array, along with 3 undeployed stealth drop pods, had been reduced to molten slag. The ruptured plasma engine conduits were now spewing billowing clouds of orange flame. Crawling on his hands and knees, he lunged for the flight stick, maxing out what little thrust was left. The 170-meter orbital stealth cruiser, now trailing kilometers of crimson plasma fire, fled desperately toward low Earth orbit like a goose shot by a hunting rifle. Several red-hot chunks of armor plating, trailing lines of light, began their leisurely descent toward the Sussex County plains 30,000 feet below, painting the stratospheric clouds with a blinding blue halo. Big-bearded Jim wiped the splash of ice beer off his face. Looking up through the BBQ-scented smoke, his eyes caught the blinding blue explosion blooming in the stratosphere. A few glowing red chunks of armor trailed bright streaks as they plummeted, cutting crooked lines of white smoke through the thin clouds. The crowd of thousands went absolutely feral. The nearest redneck hurled a half-rack of freshly smoked ribs straight into the sky. Hundreds of modified pickup trucks laid on their air horns at the same time, vibrating the empty beer cans on the ground into a frenzy. The wall of whistles and cheers completely swallowed whatever echo the pneumatic cannon had left. Jim was laughing so hard his bushy beard shook. He kicked the blistering hot crossbeam of the WAI anti-air mount, hollering loud enough to cut through the deafening noise. I damn well told y'all. Shove that shiny rocket fuel into a pumpkin and miracles happen. That sumbitch flew at least 7 miles. That's a state record, damn straight. A farmer in camo gear slapped him hard on the back, splattering beer foam all over Jim's neck. Organizers really outdid themselves with this daytime fireworks edition, throwing up a blast that big to celebrate a broken record. 10 times better than last year's champion show. Nobody cared what those red-hot fragments falling from the sky actually were. A bunch of half-grown kids were already running barefoot across the dirt ridges, chasing the furthest chunk, totally convinced it was just debris from a special festival firework. Earl's work boots crushed an empty beer can rattling on the dirt. His soles scraped past half a rack of BBQ ribs, dropped by the cheering crowd. He walked straight toward the 17-ton tactical lander, half sunk into the farm's black mud. He squatted down, rubbing his rough fingertips over the still sizzling plasma scorch marks on the hull. Peeling off a flake of odd blue-tinted metal, he frowned. He flipped open the rulebook clipped to his cardboard clipboard, the pages flapping violently in the wind. He jammed his finger onto the 3rd bolded rule. All competing launch devices and accompanying vehicles are strictly prohibited from utilizing chemical, nuclear, or non-aerodynamic auxiliary propulsion system. Violators will be subject to immediate disqualification. Earl fished a Sharpie out of his cargo pants and furiously scribbled 3 massive lines on a yellow citation ticket stamped with a cartoon pumpkin. He even threw in a flamboyant signature. Rearing back his arm, he slapped the bright yellow disqualified ticket flat onto the alien tactical lander's alloy armor with a resounding smack. The force of it knocked loose clumps of dry mud from the armor plating's seam. He clicked on the megaphone strapped to his waist. The screeching static instantly overpowered the blaring truck horns. Attention all competitors. That unregistered tech crew that just signed up is in severe violation. Unauthorized modification of non-aerodynamic thruster. Their score is completely void. No spot on the podium for them this year. As the megaphone's echo drifted over the fields, Earl glanced at the adjutant and the 6 elite alien troopers standing by the lander. This crew, their visors caked in diesel muck and still clutching greasy wrenches they hadn't put down, were staring blankly at the yellow slip of paper on the hull. They were so shocked, they even forgot their tactical breathing rhythms. Earl wrinkled his nose and snorted. He thought these nerdy sore losers were just downright pathetic. Waving his clipboard, he turned back toward Jim's pneumatic cannon to officially log Jim's flawless, stratosphere-shattering score. The adjutant's tactical visor was still flashing insane error codes at the bright yellow ticket on the hull. Red warning characters flooded his entire field of view. The diesel sludge caked on the outside of his faceplate was now flaking off, soaked by the cold sweat beading on his forehead. The greasy wrench he had been gripping for dear life slipped from his fingers, landing in the mud with a clink. Behind him, the 6 elite assault troopers remained completely frozen, wrenches raised, their brains totally blue-screened. Out of the thousands of siege combat protocols they had memorized at the Galactic Empire's Supreme Command Academy, not a single page ever covered what tactical orders to issue when faced with a disqualification citation featuring a cartoon pumpkin. Trembling, he raised his wrist, trying to patch into the orbital cruiser's encrypted channel. The wrist comms just spit back a wall of low-frequency diesel engine interference and BBQ grill static. He couldn't push out half a byte of valid data. Before he could even drag a fraction of his sanity back from the void, a blast of heat smelling heavily of butter and cow manure washed over his visor. Aunt Betty's heavy welding glove clamped onto the heat dissipation grill on the back of his power armor's neck. With sheer brute force, she yanked his entire half-ton armored chassis backward 3 steps. The dent Jim had smacked into his pauldron earlier gave a loud squeak, splitting open a fresh crack. The 6 troopers beside him snapped out of it and prepared to drop into a combat stance. Instantly, 4 or 5 farmhands with biceps thicker than their plasma rifle barrels cheerfully threw their arms around the troopers' pauldrons. They rapped their knuckles against the metal shells as casually as slapping the door of a custom pickup truck. "What are y'all standing around in the mud for?" Aunt Betty's booming voice pierced the filter layers of his visor, making his eardrums throb. She dragged him toward a canvas tent, billowing with savory smells, crushing empty beer cans underfoot. "Just 'cause you lost the competition, don't mean you gotta stand out here and starve. I just fried up a fresh batch of pumpkin fritters. They're still dripping with syrup. Eat up, there's plenty." The adjutant's overloaded thrusters were still hissing white smoke. His boots dragged 2 deep trenches through the mud. His pauldron joints were locked so tight he couldn't muster an ounce of resistance. He could only watch helplessly as the bright yellow citation on his tactical lander grew further and further away. The sweet, sickening aroma of cinnamon and hot cocoa shoved its way through his visor's intake valves straight into his respiratory system. Surrounded by the burly locals, the 6 rigid alien soldiers were shoved right through the open canvas flaps of the tent. The soles of the adjutant's half-ton power armor crushed the scattered empty beer cans in the dirt, flattening the aluminum into shiny discs with a crisp crunch. The fresh crack in his pauldron scraped against the canvas door flap, letting out a screech of metal that made the power servos in his neck violently twitch. In the next second, he was shoved down onto a sun-warmed hay bale. The dry stalk scraped noisily against his diesel-caked visor. His tactical sensors popped up 3 brand-new red error codes. Several massive rough hands covered in BQ sauce and burnt pumpkin crust unapologetically reached over, shoving things right into his power armor fingers. The rich aroma of piping hot fried pumpkin fritters flooded his visor vents. The sickly sweet smell of cinnamon smashed straight into his overloaded olfactory analysis module, instantly wiping out all 127 stored profiles of hazardous interstellar gases. Reflexively, he tried to raise his arm to tap his wrist communicator. 2 farmhands in flannel shirts instantly clamped down on his forearm. A freshly fried pumpkin fritter was shoved squarely against his visor's feeding port. The bottom of a thick paper cup filled with hot cocoa was pressed onto the back of his metal hand, the scalding heat radiating straight through his thermal plating. Every siege tactic, hostage protocol, and emergency procedure burned into his neural chip, turned to complete gibberish. Under the high-sugar, high-calorie olfactory assault, his neurons sparked like an overloaded circuit board. After freezing for 3 solid seconds, he inexplicably triggered his visor's feeding port, a feature untouched for 3 years. Sticky pumpkin mash and melted syrup slid through the opening and into his mouth. Beside him, the 5 troopers were also forced down onto adjacent hay bales, their hands stuffed to the brim. Fingers that had once gripped plasma rifle triggers with bone-white intensity were now delicately holding the rims of hot cocoa cups. Even the ice chunks wedged inside their thrusters were slowly melting, the rising white smoke quietly coming to a stop. The adjutant chewed mechanically on the sickeningly sweet fritter. Fine metal shards were still falling from the old crack in his pauldron. His combat nerves, stretched to the absolute breaking point just moments ago, suddenly deflated like a popped high-pressure propane balloon amid the endless clinking of glasses and boastful arguments about whose pumpkin hit 800 pounds last year. He couldn't even be bothered to fiddle with the dead wrist communicator that couldn't send out a single byte of data. He let the grease-smeared device flash its ignored red light. His eyes drifted lazily toward the open tent flap, just in time to see his tactical lander out in the mud, still sporting its bright yellow cartoon pumpkin citation, slowly being swallowed by the drifting BBQ smoke. Just then, the cracked screen of his dead wrist communicator flashed without warning. A singular, incredibly weak frame of signal from 30,000 feet up fought with everything it had to punch through the diesel interference and grill static. It flawlessly synchronized a live feed of the tent, full of elite alien soldiers sitting on hay bales munching pumpkin fritters, straight back to the bridge of the flaming orbital cruiser. Moore had already gritted his teeth, preparing to manually sweep the surface for the life signs of all lost nodes. He had fully accepted that the million-credit elite demolition squad he funded had been completely wiped out on the plains of this bizarre blue planet. Sparks were still spitting from the main console. Suddenly, the holographic projection module violently flickered twice. The static cleared instantly, and the painfully crisp live feed slapped him right in the face. The alien adjutant, sporting deep cracks in his pauldron that were actively shedding metal dust, was sitting on a bale of dried yellow hay. He was mechanically chewing a fried pumpkin fritter dripping with golden brown syrup, his hot cocoa-stained fingertips mindlessly rubbing the diesel sludge on the edge of his visor. Beside him, the 6 elite assault troopers, thrusters still caked with ice, had already propped their plasma rifles casually against the hay bales. The barrels were stuffed with half-chewed pieces of soft hay. They were literally stretching out their silver-blue fuzzed jaws to accept a second round of fritters from the locals. The edge of the camera feed panned past the flapping canvas tent corner, catching the tactical lander in the mud patch. The bright yellow disqualification ticket was flapping in the BBQ breeze. A few fat, free-range chickens were hopping on the armor plating, casually pecking at the black ink on the citation. Moore's breathing stopped. He lunged to slap the ship-wide firepower activation button. Sparks scraped off his fingertips, raining down onto the floor. But the control panel instantly threw up a wall of red code warnings. Port side stealth launch array destroyed. Main cannon energy core, 74% physical meltdown. Port shield charge only at 31%. Orbital bombardment without in-atmosphere. Ballistic calibration will result in immediate overload and disintegration of 17-ton cruiser. He slid half an inch down the backrest of his commander's chair. The broken helmet clasp rolled out of a console seam and clinked against his steel boot. The shrieking alarms across the ship had gone dead silent at some point. The crunching of pumpkin fritters, the crisp clinking of beer cans, and big-bearded Jim's booming voice roaring, "Sprinkle some more cinnamon for the new boys," flooded the smoke-filled bridge with crystal clarity over the 30,000-foot signal link. Moore's fingertips brushed against a red-hot blown fuse panel on the main console, and he yanked his hand back with a hiss. His eyes scanned the glitching holographic screen. Right there on the adjutant's polished silver-gray pauldron, Aunt Betty had slapped a bright yellow cartoon pumpkin sticker. The 6 elite assault troopers were holding steaming fried pumpkin fritters, the muzzles of their plasma rifles plugged with baked hay. One of them had been forced to chug half a mouthful of foaming beer, his entire face turning the exact same shade of orange as the ship's plasma exhaust. The feed scrolled down. On the armor of the lander stuck in the mud, the triple yellow violation ticket had been pecked to shreds by the chickens. Earl the judge was squatting next to the hull, clipboard tucked under his arm, methodically writing out remarks on the official tournament registry, his pen clicking rhythmically against the cardboard. Moore gave one last tug on the engine throttle he had already shoved past the physical limit. The warped metal rod groaned in agony. The red codes on the main screen practically spilled over. Main cannon energy core, 74% physical meltdown. Orbital firepower authorization permanently rejected. Remaining thrust only sufficient to maintain low-speed glide at edge of atmosphere. He gripped his bruised knuckles until they turned deep purple. Grabbing the metal helmet dangling from his shoulder strap, its clasp long gone, he smashed it straight into the sparking control panel. Plastic shards exploded across the desk, landing perfectly on the half-burnt Galactic Empire orbital firepower calibration protocols, grinding the line that read prioritized low-tier civilizations for orbital saturation cleansing into dust. The moment the encrypted comms link connected, the sector command general, sitting upright in his spotless silver and gold combat uniform, waited to receive the report of a glorious conquest. Moore didn't even bother padding the report with the Empire's standard bureaucratic headers. His hands shaking, he typed out lines of text that practically radiated sparks on the display. Artillery Commander Moore, Galactic Empire 73rd Orbital Reconnaissance Fleet, submitting final retreat evaluation for the Delaware Sector Combat Zone. Our stealth coatings were completely neutralized by civilian diesel exhaust and BBQ grease particulates. Our plasma rifles were mistaken by the local natives for automotive modification tools. Our maximum yield antimatter grenade was loaded into a crude aerodynamic pumpkin cannon and fired, directly destroying our vessel's port-side core array. The elite ground demolition squad has entirely lost the will to fight. They are currently consuming high-sugar fried pumpkin products and actively refusing to return to combat formation. The farmers in this sector possess rogue ballistics tech entirely inexplicable by current galactic physics. The entire population displays an extreme disregard for all interstellar combat safety protocol. All high-energy strike capabilities have been effortlessly countered by massive kinetic blunt force trauma. The ship's orbital firepower system is completely scrapped. Maximum tier warning. All Galactic Empire units are permanently banned from entering the Sussex County, Delaware combat zone on Earth. This sector has completely fallen. The exact second he hit the send button, a thunderous collective cheer erupted from the ground. Big bearded Jim had just popped the relief valve on the pneumatic destroyer Mark EI. A massive, dozens of feet high cloud of white steam rocketed into the air. The deafening wall of sound slammed straight through the comms link, instantly freezing the Sector Command General's holographic projection into a violently glitching, pixelated mess. Moore slumped into his deformed commander's chair. Looking down through the cracked, tempered observation window, he watched the pale orange BBQ smoke, mixed with hay dust, rising from the earth below. It sat there like an impossibly thick, mocking filter, effortlessly burying 3,000 years of the Galactic Empire's interstellar combat protocol.
Man, I still can't get over Aunt Betty snatching a live antimatter grenade and shoving it straight into a pumpkin. Hell yeah! Those elite alien shock troopers thought they were bringing the apocalypse, but they just got put to work scrubbing BBQ grills and getting force-fed, deep-fried fritters. That is some badass redneck engineering right there. So, let me ask you, if a squad of high-tech aliens crash-landed in your backyard, what piece of rusty junk from your garage are you using to show 'em who's boss? Drop it in the comments. Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe for more HFY madness. Catch you next time.